Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
John L. Potash is an author and filmmaker known for his work on controversial topics, particularly the CIA's alleged involvement with drugs and its targeting of activists and musicians. Potash has appeared on TV and radio programs like C-SPAN's American History TV, A&E, and RT, and has worked in counseling for over 25 years. He holds graduate degrees from Columbia University and is recognized for his detailed research into the impact of U.S. government actions on cultural figures and movements. But today we're going to talk about his film, Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics. So how's it been going?
It's been going well, John. Thanks for having me on. I'm actually working on a sequel to this film, so it's on my mind a lot, but I look forward to talking about Shots,
Okay. Okay, that's good. I mean, I kind of stumbled across this, like many others, during the height of the pandemic frenzy, when it was being shared around a lot. And I mean, it's such an important film, and I don't think that there are enough people who have seen it. So that is the purpose of this interview, to kind of push it to the forefront even more. What exactly got you on that path that you decided you were going to make that film?
Well, so around 2019, let me see. I'm getting lost on dates now. I put out the Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the film based on the book of the same name, back in 2018. I finished that in 2018 and put it out. Gravitas Ventures actually held it for a bit, but then actually officially released it in 2019, beginning of January 2019. And by mid to late 2019, I just had so much more information on the same topic that I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to make a sequel to this film. And so I started making the film that eventually became CIA Drugs Are Us, a Drugs as Weapons sequel. And I was, basically mostly not completely done it, but, close to done it. Maybe, I thought I was done that film, basically, 3/4 to, maybe 90% done. And the pandemic hit in March of 2020. I'd shown maybe a quarter of the film to some friends back in, remember, on New Year's Eve in 2019, 2020, going into 2020. And then when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, I, was holed up like other people, like the whole country was, maybe a lot of the world. But really our country was majorly holed up, and saw the craziness of businesses being closed. And I ended up seeing the film with Judy Mikovits, I think is how you pronounce her name, that someone did. And that, raised a lot of questions in my mind about things. And then I started just exploring more and more that's out there of alternative narratives. And I saw this New York Times writer. He had written for the New York Times for 11 years, and he wrote a series of articles called Unanswered. I think it was like Unanswered Truths, and it basically questioned each part of what was going on in very interesting ways, and was getting huge sales on Amazon, just like the Judy Mikovits film got, went viral with millions of views right away. His series on Amazon was selling really fast. And he basically, his name is Alex Berenson, and I have him in the film, and I have his Unanswered Truths in the film, analyzing different things, and along with many other, doctors and all, analyzing things in different ways. And basically, it showed, he analyzed that the document of the CDC to prepare for a pandemic. Pandemic happened. Here's the steps that were supposed to be taken, depending on the degree of the pandemic. And even in the most severe pandemic, which he says, analyzing it, the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't. But even with severe pandemic, they would not close schools for as long as they did. They closed them from sometime in March or April, I believe, to the rest of the year, and then kept people home even the first months of the following year, I believe it was. But he just showed all these different things they did, closing down small businesses. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a speech just said the numbers were in the millions. It was several million. I think it was over a million, we'll say, at least I believe. He said small businesses were closed. And meanwhile, the Walmarts were allowed to be kept open. The big grocery stores, the chain stores were allowed to be kept open, while the smaller stores were closed. And 41% of Black businesses never reopened. So it was like a devastating for the Black community. And, so it was just a huge wealth transfer from the lower and middle class upwards to the super wealthy who owned the Walmarts and chain grocery stores and the Amazons that were selling things that way, and the high tech companies that were selling things that way. And so I thought, I've got to make a film about this. I started putting more and more of this information into CIA Drugs or Us. And but slowly but surely it made me transform CIA Drugs or Us into Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics, because it was just such an incredible thing that was happening. And I had already looked at the history of eugenics through a book called War Against the Weak, and that was I included a little bit of that in my 2 or 3 pages of that in my Drugs as Weapons Against Us book. I had a little bit of that in my film, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and that really just showed me what these people's intentions are. And there's a book called Rockefeller Medicine that also just showed how the pharmaceutical industry was historically controlled by the Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgan interests. And a lot of these drugs were petroleum based, and the intentions of the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgans were not good. They were incredibly racist, and they were incredibly genocidal and sterilized people of color. They were racist, and they were incredibly prejudiced against Catholics and Jews. And they themselves were the wealthiest white Anglo-Saxon Protestant families. And so they really were they called 90% of people of color inferior and in needs of sterilization or elimination. And they carried out sterilization on tons of people, and they eliminated people through feeding them tubercular milk in hospitals and public hospitals that they went when poor people went to, and people of all ethnic groups went to. So these were the eugenics part of it were just incredibly horrible, racist, prejudice, genocidal times in America. It's with this pseudoscience passed forth from the early 1900s to World War II. And these same eugenics folks actually funded the rise of Nazism in Germany. And so that's, how that came to be. It was outside money that rose that, and the brown shirts were kind of forced on the German people, Hitler and his brown shirts, the Nazi party and all that. Then when World War II made eugenics look bad, and basically the Russians defeated, Hitler's Germany, after World War II, we had, they had to go kind of a little more into hiding. They couldn't be so open about their eugenics. And I argue that they hid their eugenics inside of virology with spreading dangerous viruses, biological warfare, and these really dangerous shots. And I show the evidence that the Spanish flu was actually a bunch of really dangerous shots given to soldiers. First in the United States, where they said the first outbreak of the so-called Spanish flu was at Fort Riley. And then when they were giving shots to European soldiers for World War II. it was Rockefeller medicine based, and the J.P. Morgan family were tied in, in businesses with the Rockefellers, and so that was the start of these dangerous shots. And these were all very experimental shots that were killing some people right on the spot, were making other people just incredibly sick, or it's just really dangerous for tons of people. And there was a doctor around that time who became a journalist. It was a woman actually that was actually studied. She first became a scientist and then she went to journalism. But she lived through that time of the shots for the Spanish flu, and she said that her family wouldn't get the shots and they stayed perfectly healthy. And it was basically the neighborhoods that did get the shots got really sick. The neighborhoods that wouldn't get the shots stayed healthy. The countries that tried to avoid the shots stayed much more healthy. The ones that got shots en masse were incredibly sick and died. Many died during the so-called Spanish flu. And even PBS, a special on PBS, referred to it as the so-called Spanish flu because it really didn't emanate from Spain. It emanated from somewhere else. But so I show all the evidence of that. So then that leads up to the COVID situation. Now, before the COVID situation, though, you had President Gerald Ford and his vice president, Nelson Rockefeller, pushing people to get yet another shot at that time. And I forget which one it was. It was some kind of bird flu or something like that at that time. And they were, saying could be this mass, pandemic. And they basically convinced about 45 million Americans to get shots for that. And when basically some 30 to 70 people died from those shots out of 45 million, they just completely took it off the market. It says it's too dangerous. You got this happening, and then you had some hundreds of people getting Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is paralysis going from the feet upwards to the waist and all. And so they completely took it off the market. Now, I have people testifying about with these COVID-19 shots. Doctors are testifying that the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is showing that just in the first few months, we're seeing 2,000 to 3,000 people dying from these shots. With some maybe after some 50 to 70 million people have taken it in the first few months. And they should, they're not pulling it off the market. And so many more are having so many other adverse events. It's being caught on film of people fainting right after taking the shot, of people passing out on athletic fields and just out of nowhere, just dropping. People, giving the news or just falling out of their chair all of a sudden. It's unbelievable. At public events, people are just dropping here and there. It's really incredible what's going on. And so, the experts like Peter McCullough are now saying, now giving the exact percentages, is some of these expert doctors, like this cardiologist, Peter McCullough, in my film, Shots, has won national and international awards. He's had over 200 publications. Was vice president of Baylor University, School of Medicine. And he just had been giving shots, these COVID-19 shots, to his patients, thinking they're, believing in them, thinking they're fine. But then he started seeing his patients get really weak, have a hard time getting to their appointments like they normally could, like walking to their appointments. And he said he saw that the COVID-19 shots were having dangerous effects on a good percentage of his patients. And he was also seeing this vast amount of his patients getting myocardia and pericardia. And he said usually he would just see maybe 3 or 4 or 5 in a year. And now he was getting seeing hundreds or some crazy number, right away of this myocardia. And so he just got really scared and started researching what's going on here. He stopped giving the COVID-19 shots to anyone. He started speaking out on the issue. And so there was a lot of censorship of him for doing that. And all doctors that just spoke out about what they're seeing happening to their patients who they're giving the COVID-19 shots. a lot of them got censored. A lot of them got fired for speaking out, and it's really sad. So I thought I just had to make a whole film about that, this issue now. And that became Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics, which I finished sometime around mid to late 2021, but came out in 2022, and I believe it was June of 2022.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, it was like hotcakes, man. You couldn't get a newsletter from any supposed truth teller without it being on their list of movies to watch.
Thanks for saying that, John.
Yeah, I mean, it has really made a big difference. But I want to go back to what you were saying. I mean, how would you explain eugenics to the average person on the street who might not believe that there's an agenda? Or would you even bother?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just point them to the book by Edwin Black called War Against the Weak. And Edwin Black was the son of two partisans, they're called. They're Jewish people in Eastern Europe who were kind of caught by the Nazis, and they were going to be going to concentration camps, but they fought and they escaped from the Nazis and went to the woods to hide out. Actually, one did that, and the other found this woman. So there's this one teenage guy, Edwin Black's father, escaped to the woods to fight the Nazis. And then he found a pile of bodies. And there was this 13-year-old girl amidst this pile of bodies. And here's this 15 or 16-year-old partisan guy. He ran to the woods and grabbed a gun from his dad's cabinet or whatever, and ran to the woods and got and to fight the Nazis. And he finds this pile of bodies of what supposedly executed bodies, but one was moving, and it was this 13-year-old girl still moving, and that was Edwin Black's mother. And he got her, and found she was alive, and got her off the pile and into the woods with him, and nursed her to health. And they fought together, the Nazis from the woods, like with a lot of other partisans at the time. And when they survived, and gave birth to Edwin Black, he got very interested in the whole history of Nazism and all that, and he became a professor and wrote some incredible books about it all. His most famous one was called IBM and the Holocaust, but War Against the Weak was his first book, and it became translated in many different languages. It's a worldwide bestseller. But it's kind of censored in this country a good bit, because the wealthiest in this country don't like getting talked about, being revealed this way. It has, thousands of endnotes. It's a huge text. I'm going to go show it to you right now. Actually, right here, got it tabbed up. This is War Against the Weak. And if I have my glasses on, I can read you all the quotes and things on the back. Nice things said on the back, but it's a, international bestseller, as it says, international bestseller. But IBM and the Holocaust probably got more notoriety. Nonetheless, this book is really a great text with great index in the back, and loads of endnotes, just documenting all its sources and all that stuff. And why it's so well respected. But so I would point them to that and just say, okay, eugenics is a pseudoscience that the wealthiest families, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgan family, and Rockefeller started Chase Manhattan Bank, J.P. Morgan, is J.P. Morgan Bank, and when they merged to be J.P. Morgan Chase, they're now the biggest bank in the world. But them and the Harrimans and the Carnegies and Vanderbilts and all these wealthiest families in our country basically started this eugenics movement. Harrimans were train magnates. Anyway, they all, pushed this eugenics. They bought professors' chairs and departments all in, some of the top schools. So when Harvard or Johns Hopkins or Yale talked about eugenics, people thought it must be true. even though it's a ridiculous, racist pseudoscience. And so, as I say, it eventually, because of World War II and the Nazism, it got a bad name, but they kept holding meetings after World War II, and they still, evidence that shows that they're still having meetings today. They're still supporting the eugenics movement, today, but just don't use those terms. They put it under different terms now. And so, they really called for their own meetings. They got out when Edwin Black, puts transcripts from their own meetings about calling for the elimination of all these different types of people as inferior, and that they didn't want to make the gene pool inferior with their genes, and so they should either be sterilized or eliminated. And that's what was done. And so, I have a clip from NBC News that did a documentary about eugenics movement, and so that was going on. So these top news stations covered it a little bit, but most didn't. Most couldn't, because of all the censorship of these kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm. So have you faced any issues with censorship?
Of course. I mean, certain distributors won't carry a film like this. So my first film was distributed by Gravitas Ventures before they got bought out by a much bigger company. They originally bought my film. And so that was one, when it's Drugs, Weapons Against Us, the film's on Amazon Prime and many different, outlets, a lot of different places show it. But Shots is really only being showed by a few places. I mean, there's a lot of small places that show it, but Tubi is probably the biggest place that shows it, and most people watch it on Tubi. But yeah, so because of its content, it was much more censored. Yeah, and I get much fewer interviews. Drugs and Weapons Against Us, I got loads of interviews for, but Shots is much more controversial.
So how do you plan to expand on the whole Shots thing in your sequel?
Well, there's just so much more out there now, and the whole RFK Jr.'s Maha movement has gotten really big, and it's not to be confused with the Trump administration, even though RFK Jr. is part of the Trump administration. He was, a lifelong Democrat, like all the Kennedys were. But the Democratic National Committee would not let him run against President Joe Biden, and when he was running for president, and just following in his father and uncle's footsteps. He was named after his father, and felt when people are named after someone, they feel like they have to sometimes follow in their footsteps. And so he's just, I think RFK Jr. is an incredibly brilliant man, and he's done great work on the environment in terms of cleaning up our water supplies. The Hudson, he had the River Keepers was his group that was doing that. He's known for making incredible progress with the water that supplies New York City, and having that be clean drinking water. And he's done the same in water basins all over the country, holding trials against polluters like DuPont. There was a movie made about one of the trials he was involved in, but they didn't talk about him at all. But I forget, it was called Deep Waters or Dark Waters. I think it was called Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo and Tim, he has his last name now, but it was a Mystic River, won an Academy Award for Mystic River. But anyway, but there were some really good actors in that film, and he's done great work around the country. And while he was doing that great work for environmental causes, he had to read tons of medical literature, medical journals to be so up on these issues and to win cases in court. But while he's giving public talks all over the country too, mothers, desperate mothers of autistic kids, would come to his talks and plead with him, after the talks, to please cover the issue of vaccines contributing to their kids, causing their kids to have autism, or contributing to it at least. And so these are mothers that just saw their kids be so healthy and happy until about 2 or 2.5 years old. And then by a certain amount of vaccines they would have to take by 2.5 years old, all of a sudden they changed drastically. And so they pleaded with him, please take up, work on this issue. And he just, he said he was pulled in kicking and scratching. He did not want to get involved in this issue. But they, one of the mothers followed him to Martha's Vineyard and just sat on his doorstep until, he would read the stack of science articles she brought with her. And so he decided to read them one time when, she wouldn't leave, and just read through them and realized, I have to take on this issue. And so he talked to all the government officials he knows, including Anthony Fauci, and including, all these people, because his family's so connected to the government and public health issues. And so, and they really didn't have answers for him about these studies that showed these links between autism, vaccines and autism. And so he ended up opening up children's self-defense. He left River Keepers and started children's self-defense regarding this issue, with tons of these mothers and fathers of autistic kids, being part of the group right away. Scientists like Brian Hooker has an autistic son and became part of this group and did really good work. Mary Holland is a lawyer who did great work and as an autistic child, and became, president of the group, lawyer for the group. And just many, Polly Tommy, I don't know if she pronounces it Tommy or Tommy. She's in my film, and all these people are in my film, Shots, Eugenics, the Pandemics, doing, and they, I don't talk about the link with vaccines and autism too much, just like a small section in my Shots, Eugenics, the Pandemics, because I thought it would be just a little too much to take on at that time. And so I really mostly focused on the COVID-19 vaccine and the problems with that. But anyway, I do a small section on that, on the just vaccines and autism. But anyway, so with the COVID-19 vaccine, I point out that it's just they took away so many rights, and then they fast-tracked this vaccine. Vaccines usually take at least 5 or 10 years to be safety tested and developed carefully and all that. And they did this, COVID-19 vaccine about 9 months or less. From March, they had the breakout for this pandemic was in March of 2020. The vaccines were first tried on people in November. It's 9 months, or I'm sorry, 8 months really. But December they were first released. So it's 9 months from the pandemic hitting to the, vaccines being released, for people to take. And it's just way too fast. And the contents of the vaccine is unbelievable in terms of a technology that is shown to be really dangerous, nanoparticles that can get in any part of the body, and they go to the brain. They get past the blood-brain barrier by being injected in the, arteries in the shoulder. But then they said, but they don't go past the shoulder. They just produce a reaction that produces these spike proteins to then develop antibodies to them. But that's not the way it apparently works. The spike proteins go all over the body and even to the brain, and they damage testes and ovaries. They damage hearts. There's, cardiologists are saying they're seeing record numbers of myocardia, which is a dangerous inflammation of the heart, and other heart problems. They're saying Naomi Wolf was, famous, just a best-selling author of a book called The Beauty Myth, and she helped get the Pfizer papers released, which I talk about in the sequel, which the FDA actually sat on for 75 years. But I just, talk about all these dangers of the vaccine, the amount of adverse events that have been reported on the vaccines, astronomical in the vaccine adverse event reporting system, VAERS. And a Harvard study I show particularly says that VAERS is a voluntary reporting system. And so no one has to report their adverse events. And most people don't even know about VAERS. But this Harvard study said that, excuse me, that only about only 1% of all the actual adverse events are reported to VAERS, and at the very most 10% of all major serious vaccine adverse events are reporting. And so it's really much more than the numbers even say, but the numbers are huge for all the adverse events that came out just in the first few months when I was just finishing this film, and I could show, reflect on VAERS that were happening. And so it's really terrible that they've kept allowing the people to get this dangerous mRNA technology in this COVID-19 vaccine that was coming out of Pfizer and Moderna. And it's interesting that Moderna was given $1 billion of research money from us taxpayers, from our government, for a vaccine that with a company that's never gotten a vaccine authorized before. And that's what we're giving $1 billion to, is a company that's a startup, and part of the top management of that company are a board of advisors, I believe, but working for that company is a JP Morgan Eugenics family executive. So that's telling right there. And Pfizer has also been found. Pfizer was the pharmaceutical company that was found in the earlier 2000s to practice using incredibly corrupt business practices, to the point that getting the largest fine in pharmaceutical litigation history. They got, I believe, a $2.5 billion fine. And so I showed clips of that from C-SPAN, and that's some of what this is all about.
What's the biggest takeaway you want people to get from this film?
I guess the biggest takeaway is that there are other therapeutic medicines out there, but they've been demonized by mainstream media, sadly enough, and by Bill Gates, who never even graduated from college, but is considered, some kind of medicinal guru, even though he's got no training in anything around sciences, in terms of medicine. And what he did is he funded a bunch of studies to make a drug that works and really helps people with this, whatever the COVID-19 virus is. And it's hydroxychloroquine is what he did studies around. And what he did is hydroxychloroquine is a World Health Organization recognized essential drug, meaning that it can't be commercialized at all because it's too important. And so is ivermectin. These are two drugs that are on the World Health Organization essential drug list. And so, because they're such good drugs, such important drugs for so many people. And so what he did is he took that hydroxychloroquine that this doctor that was kind of big in the news at the time, Victor Zelenko, I believe his name is, he was using hydroxychloroquine with zinc and some other, and I believe an antibacterial, zithromycin, I believe, or another antibacterial, using them together to treat what was happening with COVID outpatient, and showed that he had incredible success with that treatment. And he kept writing letters to the White House, to Trump. And so Trump finally said something about this, what was going on with Zelenko and using this treatment. And so much of the country being told by the mainstream media to hate anything Trump said, they said, oh, this is obviously ridiculous. And so Bill Gates funded a bunch of studies and made those studies give a super high amount of the hydroxychloroquine instead of the recommended amount for it to patients. And some patients got sick, and maybe one or two died. I can't remember. But it was just because they gave this, this huge amount versus the normal amount. It's like you can give a huge amount of Tylenol and could kill someone, and yet they're not banning Tylenol and demonizing Tylenol. So it was crazy what Gates did to make that happen. And the reason he did it is because he wanted there to be no real therapy for this, and for people to say, okay, well, let's get this warp speed. Trump said it's a warp speed vaccine. That is, it doesn't matter. That's they don't find they don't find like how it's going to be for people long term, because they try to get out in 9 months, and long term is testing it over years. And so they pushed it out real fast under the emergency use authorization. And emergency use authorization can't be given to a drug when there's another drug that can be effective for that illness. And hydroxychloroquine was found to be, with zinc, and was found to be effective for the illness. So they had to sabotage that to get those vaccines out. And Bill Gates has been making loads. He's doubled his fortune when he went into retirement and started pushing vaccines all over the world. But his vaccines were very dangerous vaccines, and I showed the journal articles stating this. His vaccines had sterilizing agents in them, just like the old eugenics days, and they had substances in them that were causing paralysis in about 400,000 to 500,000 Indian boys. And so he was pushing really dangerous, corrupt vaccines, Bill Gates, in other countries, paying off various scientists and doctors on government boards to make this happen in the country of India and other third world countries. And so here he is now, pushing this dangerous drug on all Americans and many other countries. This Pfizer mRNA vaccine and the Moderna mRNA vaccine, and AstraZeneca was the biggest producer of an mRNA vaccine in Europe at the time. So I interview, I just have a number of doctors stating some of the things I'm saying, and stating the dangers of this mRNA vaccine for COVID, and stating, what it's doing and what's happening in these other countries similar to the U.S. But the U.S. obviously was the place of the biggest push. And I also showed doctors talking about the dangers of masking, of wearing masks for so long, how the mask can develop bacteria in them and get you sick, and how the masks, cause things such as less oxygen going to the brain, which is bad for you. And I also interview nurse whistleblowers saying that when they go into these hospitals, doctors are sadly misstating positives for COVID, and they're putting patients on ventilators too fast, even when they don't have COVID, and they're basically killing them with the ventilators. And so a New York study showed that over 80% of people that were put on ventilators died. And the question is, did they die from the ventilator, or did they die of COVID-19? And good evidence is that they actually died from the ventilator, not the COVID. And because there's also huge corruption, I showed another doctor who says that they were being coerced to put, on death certificates that it was dying of COVID-19 versus dying just having with COVID-19. Because there, an ABC News quoted, I believe, the CDC as saying that about 95% of the COVID deaths had 2.5% other possible reasons for their death other than COVID. So the numbers were exaggerated like crazy of how many people COVID was killing versus interventions might have been killing, or other illnesses might have been killing. And, and this is all, sadly enough, probably to get that COVID-19 vaccine pushed on people en masse, which of course happened, and happened with the mandates. You better take this vaccine, else you can't go to school, can't go to college, you can't keep your job if you're a federal job. And, if you have a health job, you can't keep your job unless you get these vaccines, etc.
All right. Well, tell us where we can find you and where we can get the film.
Yeah, thanks. So, thanks a lot, John. You can find me, all my work at johnpotash.com. That's JOHNPOTASH.com. And you can find my books, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists, my film of the same name, my book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur, State Repression of Black Leaders, and further my sequel to Drugs as Weapons Against Us, CIA Drugs Are Us. But you can also see, obviously, the trailers for these films, and the trailer for Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics is on there, and all the places you can view Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics or buy the DVD are on that website. So I hope people go look at it and check it out. Plus, I have many articles I've written on that website too to check out.
Fantastic. Well, please check out his website and go watch Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics. I look forward to the sequel.
For free.
Until next time, John, thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, John.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality, whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
All the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity podcast.